Hey everybody, Tom here with Hidden Beats, and today we are talking with Terez for our third time now. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's so great to see you again.
hmm If my mic cuts out, we can do some editing, but technical issues.
Yeah, it sounds good. Right now, I can hear my dog just chomping away at her bowl, so it's just muting myself on and off so we
Oh,
don't have this.
I don't hear her at all.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So we're here to talk to you today about your music and kind of what you're doing, and you have a new EP release. But for those who are new, can you give a little intro about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Terez. I'm an Indigenous artist and producer and sound engineer from Alberta. And I just love making things, and that's probably why my hair is pink. And it's so great to meet you.
hmm You've been pretty busy recently since we last talked. It was 2021. I have written down here Woman in the Studio program, the Her Music Awards, the panels that you've been on. What's it been like being crazy busy, it seems like?
It's been awesome. I feel like it's such a privilege in this industry to be busy. Um, because like at times it feels kind of hectic. But I just like to revert back to what would 14-year-old me think of all the things I'm doing. They would probably be losing it, thinking this is so cool. Like this is what I've always wanted to do. And even in those like really chaotic moments where you're like, I don't even know how to handle everything on my plate, just finding the gratitude in, but it is such a privilege to be this busy.
hmm Now, each of the things I mentioned kind of have their own standout points, but was there one that was your favorite that you've been a part of recently?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really grateful and blessed for all the opportunities. I think Women in the Studio has been one that has really stood out just because it partly because it's lasted so long. It's I'm still actually in the program right now. I think it's about a 9-month program, and it's a program that's aimed at closing the gender disparity gap in music production and in studios in general, sound engineering, just really seeing more women in those spaces because the stats are pretty staggering that only 2.8% of all music producers are female, which is a problem. I
hmm
want to see that change. And through this program, it has created so many opportunities. It's created educational moments, networking moments, um, just kind of like pinch me moments that have been so incredible. And it's really cool to experience people championing you and maybe at times pulling strings for you the way that men have done for each other for years in this industry. And it's really just such an honor to be part of only 6 participants every year. And for anyone that's listening who's interested in furthering themselves as a producer, specifically non-binary and females, I would more than recommend this program. Like, I cannot say enough good things about it. It's really, really career changing. And if you're kind of just dipping your toe in and you're like, okay, I'm not quite at that point as a producer where maybe I could benefit from a program like this, or maybe I didn't get in this year, I would recommend going for the Equity X program, which will give you the foundational understanding of production. And I did that too. That's how I started in production. I did that during COVID. Um, and it was, I mean, I wouldn't be here without that program. So
hmm
I can't say enough good things about either of these programs. I don't know if I mentioned this already, but they're both free. They're just application-based programs. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, I'd love to do something like that, but I bet it's just too expensive, they're application-based. So
That's awesome. Yeah.
yeah, if you get selected, then it's no cost to you. It's just education and good things and people that want to see you win, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, this is the third year I think that Hidden Beats has been involved with Women in the Studio program, talking with some of the participants, and I think I've already talked to two other ones from your cohort actually. So I'd have to go back and look at my list. There's so many names to remember.
Yeah, I bet.
hmm But one of the big things we're here to talk about is the new EP. You got Chaos Era. So can you give us a little bit of a background behind that one?
Yeah, so I have been working on Chaos Era for 2 years, which have really been the most chaotic 2 years of my life. Some of it has been really good, some of it has been maybe not so great. And so this EP really follows me kind of through that process and a lot of different emotions that come up and a lot of different scenarios from breakups to falling in love to wishing all your exes were dead. Don't worry, we cover that too.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I produced all the songs and engineered all the songs. Ruin My Life is the only song I had a co-producer on, which is Elias Edlund, who's amazing and was one of the writers on the song as
Hmm.
well. And yeah, it was quite a journey. I'm not gonna lie. It felt a little bit like being in like a mirrored room at times, because when you're writing and sound engineering and singing and producing everything, it's like a perfectionist nightmare, or
Yeah.
like your favorite place to be ever because they can pick at everything. And I definitely fell into kind of that perfectionist cycle of just not really wanting to move things forward, because it felt like every time I sat down with tracks, like I'd pick out all these things and it would cost so much more work. And having to push through that and learn how to work with that um, was a journey.
Hmm.
Made it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm excited because we've been following your music for a bit now. So, is there a track on the EP that that's your favorite? You're excited for people to hear?
Yeah, I feel like it's like picking your favorite kid.
Yeah.
Like, don't even. I think my favorite is Villain. And I think from a practical standpoint, why it's my favorite is because I got to sit with a lot of the other songs a little bit longer. And Villain had some production elements that were brought in like really like end of the game kind of
Hmm.
feel. So they still feel, those production elements still feel really new to me, in a way that's really cool to listen to, because it kind of surprises me a little bit, even though I was the writer and producer and, sat with the songs for a long time. Um, yeah, I think that that one's my favorite, but I also love Ruin My Life. I just think it's such a fun track. It's like kind of the only track that has like a funky element to it. And
Hmm.
so it really stands out in its own way for that.
Yeah, and I got to listen to some of them, and they're definitely fun. Like I said, excited for the whole release and how that goes. How do you think your music has evolved from back in 2021 when we first started talking to now?
I think it's evolved a lot. I think going from having other people produce my music to now producing my own music, there's going to be like a massive evolution, I think, for any artist that goes through that, because you get to then play with that song in a way where you can try on different like sonic elements and really refine that process and tailor it to what you want that song to sound like, versus communicating that to someone and having them interpret that, which isn't always a bad thing, like at all. I completely see so much benefit from collaboration in that way. And you just get a very different song, which can be really cool, can sometimes be limiting, but neither one is better or worse. But I think for me, especially with this record, um, I got to learn a lot as a producer. And I think you can hear that in some of the tracks. Like, I think even for Chaos Era, the title track, um, you can hear that I was going through a bit of a production phase where I was like, let's throw everything in this song. And I really like, I think when it fits the tone of the song, which is intended to be chaotic, so it works well for that reason. I think like even from having finished that song however many months ago to now, I have a lot more refinement as a producer, where I see like, okay, it doesn't make sense to put every sound ever into a song. but that was fun. That was fun that we did that. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as a writer, I think just diving in a little bit more to deeper things. I think it's personally has shifted a lot for me as a writer approaching music because I use it a lot more for catharsis.
Okay.
I went through a phase of definitely like writing for what I thought people wanted to hear. And now realizing like that can be part of my business as a musician. I can write for what people want to hear, and a different artist can sing that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to sing about stuff that a lot of artists just don't want to say or isn't commercial enough to say. And I think that's kind of been really fun for me to realize that as a writer, can have I can explore all those other commercial elements. And as an artist, I can just say what I want to say, and it can sit where it's going to sit, and maybe it's commercial or maybe it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I can have the joy to do both.
And it's interesting. So I get to talk to a lot of musicians, and you're right on track with a lot of people realizing that you can be yourself in your music. You don't have to have the commercial aspect, and it will still do something for someone.
Yeah, yeah. My belief around it, and if anyone's listening who's starting out in music, I wish I heard this advice earlier on in my career, that it's not about making music that people like. It's about finding the people that like the music that you make. Because
Mm-hmm.
there's what, like 9 billion people on the planet. There's bound to be minimum one. Like there's got to be one. But much more likely there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are looking for the kind of music that you create. You just haven't connected with those people yet. Like you just haven't found them. And maybe that's what's kind of missing in your career. It's not that you need to change what you're writing or what you're creating.
I think that's a great piece of advice that someone should definitely listen to for sure.
Yeah.
Now I have a couple fun questions, and I've been honing my interview skills a little bit more, so I try to lighten things up a little bit.
All
One of
right,
the
let's do
ones
it.
I'm always curious about is, do you remember the first album that you bought?
I remember albums that were gifted to me.
Maybe the first one that you remember, like as at a younger age, that like this is the one that I love the most, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first Avril Lavigne record that she put out, I I literally wore that CD into the ground. Like it now skips because I've listened to it so many times. I loved that record. I also got for Christmas one year an Elton John Greatest Hits CD.
Okay.
And I'm such an Elton John fan that I loved that record so much. I was also gifted a Lady Gaga record. I'm trying to remember which one it was. I can picture the cover in my head. I think it was. I feel like people are gonna come after me if I get it wrong. I feel like it was called Monster. I might be wrong, but
Okay.
it's mostly like a black cover, and then she has like a white wig on. It's very contrasty. And I've loved that record because it was so different from anything else I ever heard at that point. And yeah, I remember, okay, this is kind of embarrassing, but so I think I was like, I don't know, 13 at the time. And it was when BBM, like everyone had Blackberries. And so
Yeah.
everyone used BBM Messenger. And I didn't have the cultural context, but I loved the song Judas. And so I had in my BBM status where like I swear it was like 6 months, like Judas heart. Just I didn't know what that was in reference to at all. I still love that song. Stand
Hmm.
by my choices to put that in my BBM status. Just now understand a little bit more.
It's always funny when you think back about those things too, that, oh wow, I did that when I was younger.
Yeah, it's so funny because I actually think it's a really great test of a good lyric is like, would 14-year-old me caption a selfie with this lyric? no, then it's not a good lyric. Because like every Taylor Swift lyric was like, oh yeah, that's in
Hmm.
someone's selfie caption somewhere or in like a Facebook status post. Like that is such a great measure for me of like what's a good lyric and what's not.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a different era than that. So I can't wrap my head around thinking about a caption for a picture sometimes. It's the
Yeah.
hardest thing for me to do. But then I also look back to my first album that I ever heard was the soundtrack to Blank, which is weird as it sounds, is the weirdest movie, but it had a bunch of songs on it that I like. So that was the very first one that I bought. And when I tell people that, they're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, my family still has so many CDs. Like we used to have one of those like really bougie CD players where you like load it in. I don't know how to explain this. It has like a ring inside that holds
Okay.
different CDs, and then you like pick the number that you want it to go to, kind of like a record player, but
Hmm.
for CDs. Yeah, and we had that thing loaded up.
Yeah, I used to have quite a few at once upon a time, but cleared out some space a little bit when everything went digital.
Yeah, yeah.
But CDs are fun, and still they're starting to come back a little bit more now, it seems again.
Yeah, I kind of hope they do. It was such a fun process of like when you have a record, it was so uh like tangible and you open the little booklet and like
Hmm.
the effort that was put into these booklets by some graphic designer and photographer and it just felt like part of an experience that I don't think we really have in music with just listening digitally.
Yeah, not whatsoever. I mean, there is other fun things, but it's not the same. It definitely not. So I'm curious of something that might be on your go-to playlist that people might not expect you listen to.
That's a good question.
Almost like a guilty pleasure song.
Oh, I know what it is. Um, I mean, I think some people would expect this from me, but there's this one song on the My Little Pony soundtrack that just slaps so hard. And like when I'm sad or when I need like a little pump up, I listen to this song. But it is from the My Little Pony soundtrack, which again, like some people might be like, no, I fully expect that. And other people might be like, and that's an adult woman.
I mean, I listen to all kinds of things. I have things like High School Musical on some of my soundtracks because they just have great songs.
Yeah, absolutely. They so do. I think a movie that was a little overdone that I have different thoughts on, that's for a different podcast. Um, but the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack was insane. It was
Hmm.
so good. There's this one song on that soundtrack called The Wolf, and I feel like I'm gonna get the artist name wrong, so I'm not gonna say it, but it's such a good song, like mind-blowingly good that it's it's really cool that it came to life like through this soundtrack because that's the only way that they released it to my knowledge. And so it might not have existed if it wasn't for it being on that soundtrack.
And that's a whole different thing about music too. It's you can find it anywhere. That's gonna hit you a little bit harder.
Yeah.
Hmm. So this one's fun. Who plays you in the movie of your life?
Ooh, how fun. Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm gonna go to like daydream about this later. Um, who would it be?
Who does you justice?
I feel like Dove Cameron, if you know who that is.
I do, yeah.
She's also a really, really talented musician. I get told I look like her a lot. So
Hmm.
I feel like that might be one reason, but I also feel like energetically we're just kind of a similar vibe of like kind of cute and whatever, but also there's like a dark side where people are like, I feel slightly threatened, but you're
Like
so cute. Why would I feel that way?
it's like you're cute, but you can still cut a bitch, and
Yeah, that is me. That's
yeah.
me.
I mean, that's a fun one. I see that with you. That looks like it would fit.
Thanks.
Hmm. What is one thing that you think should be asked more in an interview that's not asked enough?
Mm. I think just deeper questions that are more so related to artists as humans. Because like we do a lot of interviews around like promotion time for a record or a single, and a lot of questions can be focused around that. Or I've found lately a lot of questions can be focused around, okay, I don't want to get in trouble for saying this either, but kind of focused around um where it feels like you're like a diversity pick a little bit.
Okay.
Uh, for example, with me being Indigenous, um, it's absolutely something that should be talked about and deserves to be talked about. And I'm so glad that's being recognized. But some interviews can feel like it focuses on it a little too hard, where it's like, okay, but I'm also not like an Indigenous elder that can speak on
Hmm.
things as deeply as it feels like you're trying to maybe go into. And I want those things to be talked about. I'm not always the person to share traditional teachings and things.
Yeah.
And it can just feel like, okay, but I'm also a musician and I'm also a human, and I have really cool things about me that I'd like to talk about. So yeah, that's a great question though. That's a really good question. And I appreciate you asking that. I think that shows a lot of self-awareness too, of like, because I'm sure you hear some answers that are like,
Hmm.
okay, no, not gonna do that. Um, but I appreciate you asking that. And I feel like my answer was a little all over the place, but
No,
I hope it.
it made sense for sure. I use that question because it helps me pick questions for another time. But when you're doing an interview, you always have to have a few cookie cutter questions that are always going to be, this and that. But I also try to make sure I do other things and get into funnier things and all over the place. So I use that a lot. And I feel you on the Indigenous thing because I'm actually Indigenous myself.
Oh,
And I don't put it out there as much as like I accept, but same as you, I don't have all the knowledge and I don't have everything. And it feels like people expect you to know everything the second you say you're Indigenous.
yeah. Yeah, and some of us have really different relationships with our Indigenous heritage. Like some of us got to grow up being very much around it. Some of us didn't even find out we were Indigenous till we were adults. And we're still learning and growing and healing as a community. Um, and it can be nerve-wracking to feel like you might say the wrong thing and not know always how to talk about things that you're passionate about, but maybe you just don't have the language to fully communicate yet.
And there's so much of that out there. And I've come to the point where I do what I do and I don't care what people say anymore at this point.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I am a little bit apprehensive. I even we saw that through this interview. Um, yeah, I feel like sometimes people, I mean, there's a song on the record about this. It's called Love to Hate, that is about people just choosing to dislike you. And it's whatever you do or however you look or whatever, they will find a way to dislike it. And
Hmm.
I actually was semi inspired by Nickelback for that song, because I think people like connect over like this,
The hatred of Nickelback.
like, oh, you don't like Nickelback? I don't either. Oh my gosh, we're buddies. Like, which it's like, it's when you click in, you're like, that's weird, isn't it? Like, same thing with the Kardashians. Like, people kind of create connection over not liking something, which I get, and that's totally human. Um,
Hmm.
but Kardashians are a great example of, it's like whatever they do, they will receive hate for it regardless.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, people have just decided to not like them. And so it can feel like at times like people are just waiting for you to stumble. And maybe you didn't say something wrong, but you didn't say it the best way you could have said it. And so now people are like coming after you. But I do think that's like kind of a newer thing and something that I'm actively trying to work through. But existing as a woman online, especially in a male dominated field like
Mm-hmm.
production, is is an interesting experience. Um, yeah, I I've tried to use my TikTok platform to like share information about production and just make it more accessible, make it easier. I think there's a really significant perceived barrier to entry for a lot of people where it's like, oh, well, I don't even want to try to get into music production because I don't want to spend like 10 grand on gear and plugins and all
Mm-hmm.
of this. You can do it inexpensively and you can, it's more accessible than people think it is. And so by trying to share that, my hope was that more people would, at least dabble, like try it out, see if you like it. But yeah, it felt like some of the response I would get was really positive, and um others was like, well, you didn't say this the right way, or like you did that
Yeah.
wrong, you did that wrong. And I have my own imposter syndrome with being a producer. Like, I know I'm a producer, I know I produce music, but I feel also like there's so much for me to learn, and that I'm gonna get like found out for like not knowing enough or not knowing things I should know. Um, and it's just imposter syndrome. It's just like
Yeah.
it's just fear, and I believe like fear is a part of the journey, but you just get to decide what part of the journey it takes on. I read this great book called Big Magic, and it talks about this in terms of like a road trip where fear is going to be in the car. You can't control that. It's going to be in the
Yeah.
car, but you get to decide if it's driving, if it's changing the radio, if it's picking the snacks, or if it's like tied up in the trunk. Their way is coming, but
Mm-hmm.
what role is it playing? And so I think it's just like a constant reminder of it's everyone feels fear, and no one is truly fearless but psychopaths. So don't be fearless.
Yeah. And I think as creatives, you have a tendency to be more fearful of things because of the way the society is now. Everyone's, like you said, looking for that stumble and looking for you to trip. So it makes it a little bit more harder.
Yeah, and I think so many artists like got into art as a career because they probably started out as being a kid that loved it, that would use it to deal with big emotions. And we can be like emotional people.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and it's a really vulnerable thing to put art out into the world. And sometimes I know for sure I forget that all the time. Like that, hey, you're actually doing something that's really brave by putting this out. Because shockingly, it does not seem to get easier for me, at least, of like the fear and also excitement.
You're still young though. You'll get over that. I've noticed that in myself. When I started doing this was literally around COVID. I
Mm,
didn't like to be in front of a camera. This was all new to me. So I figured it out and got over it. And some of my early interviews are horrible and I don't ever want to watch them again, but it gets better as it goes.
yeah,
So since we're on this topic of what people perceive, what do you hope people take away from your music?
I hope with this record that people just hear the love and care that I put into every song. Yeah, like I was talking to a friend about this, and I was like, obviously, like every artist hopes their project is going to be really successful. And I would love that, but just the amount of time and energy and love and intention I put into creating this, I really hope people just listen to it. um and maybe they like it, maybe they don't, but maybe there's like certain elements that catch your ear, or certain lyrics where you're like, oh, that's clever, that's good. um yeah, I hope that people find moments that they really like in the record.
I'm sure they will. You're good at what you do. It comes out in everything you do, really.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Now, I have one last question. It's probably the most important of all of them.
Okay.
Are you happy?
I I am very resilient. Um, this has really been like a really challenging year, and I've tried to say it like in like light and bubbly ways in in interviews, but just having to face a lot of loss and grief and looking at mortality with a very clear lens um has been really challenging.
Hmm.
And I'm really proud of myself for where I'm at because I am like I really learned how resilient I am this year. Um, I think I could be happier, but I think I'm doing really good given the circumstances.
I mean, that's a pretty solid answer too. Everyone has their moments, and I think everyone could be a little bit happier because
Yeah,
look
it's
at the
true.
world we're in, really.
Yeah, truly. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and I think that I I learned a lot. Like I learned really how short life is and how important it is to just like love fully, like show up fully for what it is like you want your life to be and for
Hmm.
the people that you love and you care about. Like you really do just love so differently when you've had to face like potentially losing people that you love. Like you just want everyone that you care about. Like I probably drive my friends a little crazy because I just have these like I'll be like, I love you so much and I'm so proud of you and everything you do. And they're like, okay, buddy,
Hmm.
for the follow-up from yesterday's text. But I I think that there's been goodness that has come out of like a dark time too. And um I think I'm on my way out of a dark time and I'm feeling a lot more light in my life, but um also recognizing that that was just that was shitty. That was shitty. That sucked.
Hmm. And you're allowed to be vulnerable, and you're allowed to be emotional, and you're allowed to feel these emotions. That's what you are as a human.
Yeah, and as an artist, like that was so much fuel to be able to pour into music that like for example Chaos Era, I didn't even think when I was writing that song that it was ever going to come out. Like I just needed a song like that in that
Hmm.
moment to be like, you're chaotic, it's fine. Like let's just like have a little celebration that you're being a little crazy right now and that's okay. That's just what you need right now.
Hmm.
And that's what um fueled that song and I didn't think it was going to go on the record. Um but I think maybe other people need it too.
Yeah. Everyone needs a little bit of extra something sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I have written down. Is there any final words of wisdom you'd like to leave to people?
Um, just that you were put on this planet for a reason, and that reason was to be you. No one else can be you the way that you can be you. And we can get really tied up in trends and in what we think we should do or should be. And I think whatever you feel passionate about, or if you have music in your heart, or art in your heart, or sports in your heart, I think that was put there for a reason. And I think that reason was for you to feel the fullness of exploring that. And it's okay to not have your shit figured out.
Hmm.
Surprise, none of us do. Just live the life you want to live because life is really short and should be really full of what you want it to be full of.
Hmm. I think that's a good leave off.
Good. Thank you
Mhm.
so much for having me. This is so great. And I really appreciate your questions. They feel really thoughtful and feels like you create a lot of space to just talk about things and for people to show up as they are. And I really appreciate that. So thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate that because it means a lot to me knowing that I'm at least doing something a little bit useful.
No, it's so useful.
Hmm.
And then people get to enjoy this too. It's like artists get to come and pour their little heart out, and then people get to listen to it and hopefully feel inspired or find new music. That's awesome. You get both sides.
Exactly. And it's always nice catching up with old friends. This is our third time, and I'm sure we're gonna have a fourth and a fifth, and who knows how many.
Yeah, let's do it.
Hmm. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day. We're gonna make sure we link all the socials and everything, and the release, I believe, is the 24th.
Yep.
So we're looking forward to that. We're gonna make sure we put that across all the platforms we can.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
All right. I will check you next time.